Hey guys, Kalendros here. Um, so this we're going to be doing a request here. This is Deathspell Omega. The song is called "Standing on the Work of Slaves." This was, of course, requested by a BM fan and actually a couple of other people as well requested Deathspell Omega. But I'm not certain what to expect with this because I'm a fairly well-known critic of the band in terms of their music, but that was primarily their earlier stuff, and I know they've changed quite a lot. So this one I was told, and it could be a troll, I don't know, that this is much more melodic and maybe something that I might enjoy. So we shall see. I do like a lot of black metal. I just don't like things that are too chaotic. So it'll be interesting to see. Especially Deathspell Omega is known for being pretty chaotic. So we'll see what happens with this one. I have all the lyrics, and by God, there's a lot of lyrics. But something interesting that that I think BM Fan had told me about Deathspell Omega is that their lyrics don't necessarily match the lyrics in the song. The lyrics are kind of like, I guess, from what he said, almost like a mission statement for the song, or like a manifesto or something, really, which maybe fleshes out some of the actual lyrics that appear in the song. So, for the purposes of analyzing the lyrical content of the song, I'm going to be going by the written lyrics and not necessarily what is being sung, because I've told that they are different. So, we'll see what happens with that as well. So, well, I guess without further ado, there's no video or anything for this. It's just going to be audio. So, I'll just leave it up for the cam. So, my webcam is bouncing a little bit. Seems to be okay.
Hands in the gallows. Oh yes, and promisingly, when the final resistance hang on the gallows, allow them blossom with the autumn flowers in the midst of spring. You will be raped to hide the dissonance of conflict. And that is the heart of the experience of our world. You shall join the chorus of praise, and flawless state of absolute perfection. We are final resistance hangs on the gallows. Oh yes, I promise someday. When the final resistance hangs on the gallows, I will listen with arrow flowers. In a maze of free, place your faith in this promise. Only when final resistance hangs on the gallows, hangs on the gallows.
Okay. Okay, so that was definitely not a troll. That was very different from anything I've ever heard from Deathspell Omega before. So, where to start with this one? There was, okay, definitely all the lyrics that were in the song is nowhere near because there's a lot of lyrics that are written here. So we'll go into that. Now, I did notice some parts that were, particularly that end paragraph, and then the beginning paragraph, of course, I recognized, and there were parts in the middle that I recognized, and it was interesting, and their idea of how they flesh out the themes in a song through like a more complex lyrical document that's meant to be taken in with the music is a really interesting idea, and actually kind of wish more bands would do that, because I think it's cool, because sometimes one thing I noticed, I'm going to use Vector as an example here, because I know that the way that he wrote Terminal Redux was as a story, and then constructed the songs around like plot points in the story. But the problem with that is then sometimes, a lot of times I think with bands that do that, the lyrics tend to feel forced. And I think by having separate documents, like, you have an actual, like, story, and this is the song, right? And then you have, what works within the context of the music. And they're two entities, but they all are pieces of the larger puzzle, right? Which I think is a really cool way of doing things. So that's kind of neat. Musically, I want to talk about it for a little bit. This was very, very sludgy, and totally different than what I was expecting. Because, he had said that it was melodic, and I was thinking, more, I don't know what I was thinking. I was thinking maybe more melodic black metal type stuff or something like that. But actually, a good example is kind of some of the newer stuff from Voitain has been, much more melodic, right, in the same sort of space. So I thought maybe it might be something like that, but it really is not at all. It's very, it was very sludgy, very dense, very heavy musically. And the end was actually where it really started to get good for me. And I kind of wish they had started that a little bit earlier, because there was a really cool tremolo picking slide riff that came in at the end that I really liked a lot. And it may have come up at an earlier point in the song and I didn't catch it, but I definitely noticed it at the end after like the lyrics had dropped out. You had this cool little section that I really liked, and but it never really went from, it never really went away from the sort of, sludge, and a lot of people think sludge is like a bad term or is a negative statement. It's not. It just is. When I say sludge, I literally mean sludge as a style of metal, not that it's boring and just sort of pointless. It's not at all. So that's kind of the interesting thing with this. Actually, there were some parts of it that reminded me a little bit of a song I really like from a band called Ahab. They have a song called Old Thunder, which has some parts like this that are like just insanely heavy, just really, really, really heavy, and it's like it's almost like, and then you get the musical equivalent, and it's really interesting because the song title is "Standing on the Work of Slaves." And the music gives the impression sometimes, and I get this with a lot of sludge, of being like oppressive, like the music it feels like a weight that's pushing you down, and it's not in a bad way, but it feels like it's just sort of like just a weight that's hanging on your shoulders, just pushing you down. So it's really interesting. I don't know that I loved it necessarily. But it's certainly something that I thought was really interesting, and I would definitely like to hear more from this record to see, one, if this is like kind of their thematic style for the record, and then two, whether or not it's whether this was like a total tonal shift for them, or like whether it was a musical idea for like this album or this song. Because one thing I will say, and this is often true of a lot of black metal bands, is they have a very clear vision of what they are trying to do. So it's like they have this concept when they come into making the record that this is the sound that they're going for, and I think it's interesting because when you look at black metal, oftentimes you get these bands that will do splits, and you don't really see this in other styles of metal, only really in black metal. The interesting thing I think about a split, and I love the concept of a split, is that you have two or more bands that share a similar musical theme, but maybe have slightly different approaches, right? And there are some bands, some black metal bands that only really do splits. The one that jumps to mind as being very much split driven is Panopticon, which is an incredible band that definitely want to react to at some point, because I don't think enough people have heard them, and they're definitely a band that everyone should hear because they have so many interesting musical ideas. What the heck is going on with my hair? So that is, that's kind of, what I thought about, like, the musical elements of this. But one of the things that I thought was really cool, also, like, lyrically speaking, there was a lot of density to the lyrics here. Let's kind of jump into the lyrics real quick. Okay, so here are the lyrics. We know your souls and inner musings intimately, therefore our songs and sonorous refrains to the glory of that which is to come shall be as familiar to you as the lullabies your mother sang when you were but an infant. Those unwilling to lend an ear will face coercion by the sword. We shall give you a stage, and you shall perform your prescribed heroic roles in front of ancestors, contemporaries, and posterity, present even in the sands of the desert or the heave of the boiling oceans. The scorching spotlight is on you. How could you possibly walk back from the precipice now? You shall aim to resemble the heroic Achilles at war under the walls of Troy, a godlike figure, possibly death incarnate. To those begging for mercy at your knees, you shall answer with the blade through the throat. To the defeated, you shall show no respect, their bodies will be desecrated. When you fall, we promise you remembrance, immortal glory, Kleos Aphathon. I don't know what that is. The band is French, so I'm guessing it's French for something. After all, what wouldn't men do only to escape oblivion? We shall trick you into believing in the idea of progress by replacing outright torture with subtler forms of domination, far more perversive and inefficient. Even the voice from the whirlwind shall be struck silent by stupor. What a line that is. We shall increase your suffering, for the more you suffer now, the less suffering we promise there is to be found in the future. You shall become addicted to suffering as a means to a radiant future. Another great line. Eventually, commitment to the ignorance shall be the first lesson taught to children, as obedience will then come as naturally as night after day. We shall make your thought patterns predictable, for if your behavior is predictable, it marks the death of freedom. We shall nurture indifference, for it is a prerequisite to great things that demand the retreat of the self. Bureaucrats pave the way to the riches of an abominable victory, whereas Saint Fond is merely a non-actionable icon. Interesting. I don't know what that's in reference to. It is our immaculate faith that shall allow us to exercise coercion effectively, but also to resist coercion when confronted by the impious. When confronted with facts that would contradict our credo, we shall speak out even louder, invoke our order with brazen words, and march forward with the arrogance of the doubtless. You will be made to deny the dissonance and conflict that is at the heart of the experience of our world. You shall join the chorus of praise that flows from the absolute perfection we have created by the sole power of our will. We shall bleed you white, but you will think that it is an act of unconditional love. As an educational tool, pain has a value nothing can replace. It shall therefore be the cement of our society. We shall build monuments that will last 1,000 years upon the wailing of the multitude, upon the labor of the slaves. Everything in this immense, beautiful machine shall be wheels, pulleys, and cords. The connections, however, shall seem fortuitous to you. We will pretend to have peace in our hearts, yet knowing that blows will avail. We shall keep the dagger near. We are therefore certain to overflow. When the final resistance hangs on the gallows, oh yes, I promise unto thee, when the final resistance hangs on the gallows, love will then blossom with the ardor of flowers in the midst of spring. Place your faith in this promise. This is standing on the work of slaves. That's very appropriate. I mean, this is like literally almost a tyrant's manifesto. And almost given almost in the same manner as you would see if you go back and look at some of the speeches that Adolf Hitler gave, right? They were, he was a great orator. There's no denying that. As evil and terrible of a human being as he was an incredibly skilled orator, and that was why he was able to, command such loyalty. It's when you read something like this, as horrible as it is, when you read between the lines and read what he's saying here. It's the death of freedom. It's the death of thought, individual thought, and it's interesting because you would think these are ideas that are the opposite, generally speaking, of what we think of as sort of metal. Metal is about like rebellion and individual thought. But it's when you look at black metal, a lot of times black metal is very regimented in terms of its thought, and I don't know much about these guys in terms of their religious affiliations, or lack thereof, whether they're nihilists or whether they are Satanists or occultists. It doesn't. There's really nothing in here that strikes me as being occultist at all, and nor what you would think of as kind of like the overtly satanic stuff. This is all really more chaos nihilism sort of, but at the same time, this could also be somewhat of a observation on where we might be headed. And these guys are French, but when you look at where we are currently as a country, right, and how incredibly fractured the U.S. is right now, because of political ideologies and everything. You look at something like this, and if you had a leader to rise that had that sort of cult of personality, this is the sort of reality that could potentially come from that, right? And there are the way that this is phrased and written. It's very, very sinister, because it's almost like, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is what you think is happening, but this is what's really going on. And it's just it's pretty scary stuff. But damn, and I remember this about the stuff I have seen from Deathspell Omega. This is nothing new. These guys are brilliant writers. There is no doubt about that. Whatever one may think about their music, these guys are just incredible writers. And it's not exactly uncommon in black metal, actually. You find, I think in some of the more extreme forms of metal, some just immensely intelligent lyrics. And this is definitely this is not a surprise in the least. I would say that this is certainly one of the more dense and sort of thought-provoking black metal songs I've seen in a while, which says quite a bit, because, like I said, it's a genre known for having a lot of thought-provoking and dense lyricism. When you cut past the some of the earlier, sillier stuff that was kind of made up the beginning of the second wave black metal stuff, like early Mayhem or Emperor, some of that stuff was kind of silly. But when you read between the lines and look into some of the stuff that's being said in particularly a lot of modern black metal, there's a lot of like really crazy lyricism. A lot of that spirit of the original stuff is there. The intense individualism, embracing the occult, and embracing Satanism as it stands as a tenet of faith. And a lot of people have many, and of course a lot of this comes down to the media, misconceptions about Satanism and what Satanism is. For one thing, there's many different types of Satanism, but there are a lot of people that think that Satanism is this, murdering babies, sacrificing, virgin women, and all kinds of just ridiculous nonsense. But actually, one of the main core beliefs in Satanism is that the power of oneself. And when you read this, that is the one aspect of this where there is some maybe sort of satanic influence, but not in what you would think of as the traditional satanic sense. It's Satanism as a philosophy, and it's definitely in here, because he's talking about this from the perspective of the person writing this. He believes in his power, and whether it's a entity like sort of meant to be like a Satan type figure, or whether it's just a person who is, like I said, like a tyrant or tyrannical ruler of some sort. The idea is that he is incredibly self-possessed and believing in his own vision, and is going to bend everyone to his will. All of which are things that are in moderation, I would say, pretty admirable things about Satanism, because one of the things that I have always found to be somewhat a little scary about Christianity is how dependent upon the idea of God you are, in terms of basically surrendering your power over to this being that we just don't know whether it really exists or not, and so there's just a really interesting dichotomy when you look at the lyrics here. And then musically, I mean, like I said, it wasn't bad. I would say this one, for me, I mean, if you're rating it on a scale, this is definitely like a 10 lyrically, and probably about like a 7 or an 8 musically speaking. Between, like, maybe I'll go with a 7.5. And vocally, it was interesting too, because this definitely did not bother me at all vocally. And black metal is one of those categories of music where there are definitely vocalists in black metal that I just cannot stand in the slightest. So this one was it was very much a blackened speech almost. It was not so much singing or screaming as it was sort of using that distorted black metal voice, but to sort of just speak, as opposed to attempt to just scream. And a lot of that, I think, comes down to the musical style that was accompanying it. So it fit what the music calls for. So pretty cool in that regard. So definitely an interesting song. So I really enjoyed the request, and be interested to hear more from these guys. Their new stuff is certainly interesting. Much more so to me than their earlier stuff. So, all right. Calendris out. Stay metal, everybody.